It's Tuesday lunchtime, and we all know what that means. It's time to look over the shoulders of me and the team as we discuss all things property on Property Realm. So, welcome. Grab a cookie, a glass of milk. Probably on today, like today, something hot chocolate or a coffee or something like that. A hot cookie, Pop Tarts. Anyone remember Pop Tarts? They were pretty special back in the day. Anyway, I guess I'm showing my age here. All right, today we're talking about a topic that we have gotten asked about quite a bit this year, and especially so in the last couple of months. And that is, how do you price property in a rising market? And I think it's a fairly valid question. And the reason is because data is lagged, and it's pretty hard to get a good idea of something if you have no idea about what prices actually are. No one's telling you, or what about if there hasn't actually been anything sold in that area? And these are the things we're going to cover today. Realmers, where are you? Welcome. Who we got here today? All right, we've got CO, we've got Ross, we've got Karen and Remo. That's the order on my screen. Maybe it's the order on yours. Aren't you a fantastically good-looking bunch, most of you today?
How's it going?
And full of life. It's like buoyant. I can feel the energy coming through the screen here. You guys are just cranking it today. Thank you very much.
I'm just trying to figure out who you were insulting there, mate.
Well, that's the thing, right? I said most of you, and you can figure out who's who in the zoo there, right? So, okay, let's kick it off. So we got 3 ways. A couple of weeks ago, we sent an email out, our scribbles, and we talked about the 3 ways, the common ways that we use to price property. It's not just us, like there's 3 common ways to price property, more than just a comparative. So we're going to go through them one at a time. Those 3 ways are what I'd call an extended CMA. So a CMA is a comparative market analysis. It is, there's a house in this street and a house in that street and a house a few streets over. They're all 4-bedroom and they're all similar age or whatever, and similar size blocks, and you go, okay, what did that sell for? What did that sell for? What did that sell for? And you get an idea of pricing. That's a comparative market analysis, but it's problematic in the current market for numerous reasons. The data can be slow to upload. There might be no data because there might not have been sales in that area. It could be a new area. It could be a whole myriad of reasons. So with that, we need to go to extended CMA, and that is what Karen is going to talk to us about at the moment. Her and I are going to have a discussion on that, and that is an extended CMA. The second one is a build or a rebuild pricing, right? So a lot of quantity surveyors use this sort of thing, and that is the cost of land, either for those blocks or per square meter if it's industrial commercial, and what's the cost to replace that if we built it now. And so that's the build model. That's number 2. And the third one is actually called the income capitalization assessment model, I think, or some sort of technical term like that. And we're definitely going to get a specialist in to talk about that, who is in our team today, and that's Ross. All right, so Karen, where are you? Let's have a discussion about CMAs, because you've done like bucket loads of CMAs on houses over the years, right? And normally they're fairly simple, but right now it can be a bit harder to do. So tell us a bit about what a CMA is, how it works, and how we can extend upon it.
I used to be able to guess house prices pretty accurately. I'd see just an ad come through and I'd see the suburb and a picture of the house, and I could be within 5% of what the price was, and I was my own personal CMA almost. But now I'm like 50% out some of the time. So I definitely need to go look up sold data. So there's 2 things I do with the CMA. I look up either Price Finder or what they call RPA data, and that actually takes data directly from sale prices and what's gone through state revenues offices. Then I also look on realestate.com and Domain to see what people are asking for stuff that's in a similar price. And usually if the last few things that are sold were a few months ago, I'll add a little bit extra onto it as well. CMAs used to just, find another house in that area and things were pretty much even up. You have to watch if one side of the street is a canal, one side of the street's got a view of the water. So different streets can have $1 million difference from one side to the other. As you said, nowadays it's a little bit harder to do it. You might have to go further afield, find a neighbouring suburb that has similar values. or different or a similar sort of a house and what they're selling for. As quickly as property is being sold, there doesn't seem to be as much around to always price things at. But doing a CMA now does take a lot more work. And as I said, if something sold 6 months ago that was in that unit block or in that street, you can probably add 10% or a bit more on top of it now, because that was 6 months ago. Prices have gone up already. Are you on mute, Scott?
Oh yeah, if you touched on a really good point there, that if it was a suburb that was similar, and that's where the art form comes in, right? Because you said a couple of things. You can say that there's $1 million difference in street to street, and yet you're going to go and look at another suburb to get a comparable in price because there's not enough data in the suburb you're in. That's where the magic happens, because you can be really wrong on that. So what are some of the things that you look at in terms of how do you make sure a suburb is like for like? So say you've got suburb A, there's nothing more in there to compare with, so you need to go and look at suburb B, C, and D. How do you know that suburb C is the one to compare to and not B and D? You know what I mean?
In Queensland and parts of New South Wales, I probably know most of the suburbs because I've lived up here and been an agent around these areas for a long time. So, I kind of know what ones are like for like. Once I venture out and do stuff for clients in other states where I'm not overly familiar with the suburbs, you can simply go in and check what the median house price is. So if the median house price in one place is $1 million and in the other one it's 700,000, it's like, why is that? And do a little bit more investigation. Or I may have to ring a local agent in that area and get a little bit more data from them, perhaps, because they know things exactly. And with all suburbs, there can be a really good area, and then one part of that suburb might be predominantly an industrial area with a bit of housing built around it, and they can have a very different pricing to a very exclusive part of that suburb. So a lot of things I just know the suburb. Other things I need to do a lot more investigation to see why neighbouring suburbs have different price tags or different values.
Yeah, so that's good. So you need the data and the local knowledge. That's important. All right, that's good. So that's how we do an extended CMA. So when it's too hard in the suburb you're in or not enough data to do anything, you got to go further afield, but you got to make sure you pick like for like suburbs. Not much point picking a suburb that is inferior or superior because your data is going to be completely useless on the property you're trying to price. All right, so the next one, thanks for that, Karen. The next one we're going to look at is building, and it's the build replacement model. So this is where we're going to get comments from Remo and then Ross is definitely going to take us through the third one. So the build replacement model is when you go and look at either a property, any property, can be a house, can be a block of units, or it can be industrial shed or whatever it might be, and you say, okay, so what is the going rate for land in that area? And you may or may not know that. You may have to do an extended CMA to get that data, but you get that land data. And then you go, what's the fit and finishes? And how much is it going to cost if I had to rebuild this property? Or if I had to build it now from a vacant block of land, what's it cost? So, Remo, Ross, who wants to take us through that?
Yeah, I'll start that one off quickly. Very interesting question. Very interesting that you asked that. I actually went out to Yarrabilba on Thursday or Wednesday last week. Oh, Thursday with Ross. Obviously, Yarrabilba is one of our light industrial developments, and obviously because there's no comparables in that area, that's probably something that we'd be implementing in that area. Again, I think you'd want to look at the cost of the land, cost of the build, and then obviously add a margin to that. But typically in areas like that, the builder typically stipulates what they want to sell for, especially if there's absolutely nothing available, which is what we've seen in Yarrabilba. There was one for sale sign and one for lease sign up in about 2 hours that we've driven around the entire place. We saw 5 residential properties for sale and one for sale and one for lease for light industrial, and then spoke to owners in that complex and found out that that sign is old, it needs to be taken off, and that there's actually nothing available. So yeah, interesting, very, very interesting. I wasn't I wasn't very sure on what we would sell for in that area. Looked at some comparable figures, spoke to some agents, they gave me some figures, and the figures that they gave me were from 6 to 12 months ago. Looking at it now and looking at the figures that we've discussed with Ross last week, I even think that the figures that Ross gave us last week are extremely conservative. I think we can obviously get more for it, purely based on the fact that if we had to take a clean block of land and develop it, the cost of building's gone up, obviously, the cost of land's gone up, and you're not going to make money if you just sold it for what it's costing you, right? And also, everybody in Australia, their equity's gone up by 40 to 70%. I've got a house across the road from us. They bought their property and built a house for 400,000. They just sold it for 1,580,000 and went down the road, literally 200 meters, and bought a house for 900,000. So same type house, it was just a little bit cheaper. They obviously wanted less. But at the end of the day, if I look at property, your house is only worth what someone's willing to pay for it. And right now, because there's so much equity and so much money, people are willing to pay so much more. The fact that we've got no land available, we're so short on builds at the moment, meaning there's nobody to build. So already constructed developments are becoming more expensive. If you can find a builder and you can build something, people are more likely to pay a little bit more for something new. Yeah, the list goes on. So
yeah, all right. So I mean, that's really good points there you've raised with the the parameters around it, the pressures and what have you. So Ross, over to you. If you, as someone who's built a house or two in his day, mate, how do you use this model to the best of its ability, and when do you use it? The build replacement model for pricing.
We were still talking about the cost approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, if you're looking to value a property to buy something, then it's really as simple as the value of the land plus the cost of construction, and that's how you come about with the valuation for using the cost approach. So, for example, if the land was worth 500,000 and the construction was worth 600,000, then it should be around about 1.1. So, if the asking price is significantly different to that, it's either going to be overpriced or underpriced. So, if you're looking for a valuation to support your finance application, then that's where you can potentially get into a little bit of trouble if the valuation is far away from the actual contract price. That's probably something else to consider that hasn't been touched on yet. And I don't know if you want to add anything around that before we look at the income capitalisation.
Yeah. So on that, that's a good point. So what happens if we're in the market at the moment, we're using this model for one of the ways of pricing, but build prices keep increasing? Do we take an estimate ourselves? Do we get an estimate from the builder? Do we just add on 15% for good luck? Like, how do we work out what the build cost is going to be in 12 months' time?
Well, that's difficult to consider at the moment, but one of the mathematical considerations is if the property in total is $1 million and you've got 80% finance involved, you'd have a 20% deposit being $200,000. But if things run away, if the valuation stays at $1 million, any differential is going to have to come out of your own cash. So potentially, if there was a 10% increase on a $500,000 build, then that extra 50 grand is going to come out of your back pocket or equity, which will reduce your overall gearing at the back end. But could be an unpleasant outcome if you need to find $50,000 on short notice during the construction process.
Yeah, no, that's right. So, okay, so far we've covered the extended CMA, the builder estimation model, which are two fairly. Well, the first one's fairly familiar. The second one's fairly simple-ish to do. Bit harder in the current market with rising prices, but essentially land price plus cost equals replacement value. So the third one is probably the most interesting one, and probably one that a lot of our watchers and or viewers and or clients haven't heard of. So Ross, we are going to let you go to this one, and this is the third model with the cap rate and what have you. So over to you, mate, and tell us what it's called.
Yeah, so just recapping the three different valuation methodologies is the cost approach we just covered. The first one that Karen covered, which is a sales comparison model. And then the third is the income capitalization approach, which is typically used in commercial property or anything other than residential normally. So effectively, you are looking at what your investment return is or targeted to be. And so, for example, if the rent was $52,000 a year or $1,000 a week for convenience, if you divide that by 5%, if you want a 5% return, the value of the property would be $1,040,000. If you wanted a 10% return on your money, then it'd be 52,000 divided by 10%, which is 520,000. So that percentage number is called the cap rate or the capitalization rate. So you're simply dividing a really small number as a percent into the rent, which is a bigger number, and then you get a really large number, which is the value. So that's the cornerstone of all commercial valuations is the cap rate. And then there's various different other commercial versions around that. But, maybe we want to dive into that a little bit more, Scott.
Yeah, I would. So because this could be fairly new to a lot of people. So let's, using those figures or using whatever figures you want, explain that in depth and perhaps how a slight difference in the cap rate can change substantially the difference in the valuation.
Yeah, so the values, they'll look at things like marketability of the property, the stability of the sector, and perhaps any uncertainties. Then we touched on construction costs and things like that. So that cap rate will vary. So tightly held properties could, like a McDonald's or something like that, might trade at 5% cap rate. If it's a government building with a 20-year lease, it could trade even tighter, which would be a smaller number. And things in more far-flung regional areas it could be in the tens. And if it had a vacancy, then they'll adopt a really high cap rate, and then they'll discount the lease-up period and incentives and all these other things, which will drastically reduce the value of the property. Those things for an investor who knows what they're doing, they can manage those risks, but they are risks that the value will load into the valuation to reduce the value of the property for the contract. And the other thing we need to mention too is that oftentimes, if the contract price is fair and reasonable between a willing seller and a willing buyer, the value will often adopt the contract price. So you don't want to forget about that either.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a good point. All right, so using your $1,000 a week model, and we've got 52,000 a year in rent, at 10%, that's 520,000 for the valuation of the property, right? And at 5%, it's $1,040,000. So where do we get these rates from? Are these just figures that we feel like it, or is there a going rate for, say, a McDonald's or an industrial shed or a Bunnings? Like, there must be going rates for this, and therefore that drives pricing.
Yeah, so it's the same as what Karen was talking about in regard to current market transactions, that they can go further afield. So if McDonald's is an international brand, they don't need to find a McDonald's that's in the same suburb. They can find a McDonald's that's further away, or a series of McDonald's, or a series of accountancy firms or Bunnings or whoever the tenant is. So they'll go like for like if it's a government tenant, and also they look at the quality of the lease. How long is the lease? There's a term called a WALE, which is weighted average lease expiry. So if you're looking at a complex which has got more than one tenant, you need to look at all of the leases. So it becomes complex really quickly. But it's fair to say that typically the investment returns on commercial property are often better than the investment returns on residential in regard to cash flow. But then you have to take capital gain into account as a completely separate conversation.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's look at this. So I've got my little calculator here on my phone. So I've got my $1,040,000, right? So we'll do 52,000, and then we do divided by 5%, right? That's our $1,040,000. That's what we're getting there. So that's our 5% cap rate. So let's say the cap rates are normally 6% though, Ross. So if we do that, we do 52,000 divided by 6%. That gives us 8,666, right? So we've got 870,000 in terms of evaluation at 6% cap rate. So by changing the cap rate 1%, there's a substantial change to the value of the property, right? So this is the big deal. So can you do things if you buy a property, or you want to do things to change that cap rate to the market? So for example, my question is, if we buy something on a 6% rate, but we know we can do something to get it down to a 5% rate without fundamentally even changing the rental, therefore we're getting a substantial uplift in property value. That's correct?
Yeah, so if you had some vacancy in the property and you put more tenants in there or better tenants, you get an uplift. You might do some renovation work, improve the way the property looks. It might have some outstanding maintenance work. You could take care of that. It simply might be a matter of the location that you bought the property, that the suburb around it grows and the population goes up and it becomes more desirable. And then also you've got to look at what they call the highest and best use. Is the existing use of the property, is it going to get rezoned at some point, and it can be used for something else? So you could have bought it as a house, and then it could be redeveloped as either a block of units or a commercial premises. So and there could be residual vacant land attached to it. So the highest and best use is probably one of the first things that you want to look at when you're looking at a property. Is this what it's always going to be, or can it be something better?
Yeah, okay. All right, that's good. So we can potentially change the cap rate by doing, either more tenancies, doing a renovation, doing whatever, that sort of stuff. If we're building a new property like we were at our current site at Yarrabilba, there's a cap rate calculation that's used because that's the going rate on a cap rate for industrial sheds in the area. Is that how you came to the calculation on one of the valuation methods?
Yeah, so we would look at other similar transactions. So that's a transaction in the scale of $20 million. We would look at other similar scaled transactions, and then we would look at similar tenant mixes, the similar localities, and we have to look at, because they want to be comprised of a number of different tenants, so we'd have to look at the weighted average lease expiry for the overall lease, and all of those factors would be considered by a valuer, and then they'd go off and do current market transactions that are like for like, and then they would look at the cost approach. They would look at how much is it cost to build, and they would look at those three different methods. And if we had sold the property in one line, they would look at the contract price, which is the fourth method, and then they would look at potentially either picking one of those or maybe averaging a couple of them and then coming up with a number, and they would normally sit sort of within that range. Valuers rarely value a property higher than the transaction value.
Oh yeah, no, that's the story of my life, mate. When we're buying property, residential property, that's for sure. So yeah, Ross, before I move on, I'll move on from you quickly. I'm going to go to CO, but just can you give us a 1 minute rundown, because you used at least two of these methods to price our Yarrabilba industrial development site, and they came out within a 15th of each other, right? Like really, really close. So do you want to quickly run through that?
Yeah, there's another approach we used as well. It's called a residual land value. So we looked at when we built it, and then we developed it out, and then what's it worth in the long run, and then over that time, then we do a discounted cash flow and work back to what the residual land value is. So we also do that, which is a far more complex approach, which is used in commercial valuation. So when you sit down and work it all out, then you just work. At the end of the day, you've just got to make a commercial decision whether you're going to pay for it or not. You've got as much market support as you can get, but at the end of the day, you've got to make a decision yourself. The data will lead you into a certain direction, and it'll give you some confidence. But after that, you become the entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's a very good point. All right, so CO, over to you. And you're probably one of the main reasons that we really explore this fairly, substantially, because you've had some comments from some of our direct clients on our Yarrabilba site saying we want to see comparables, which we always give, and of course then they say, hang on, there's nothing from the area. So how did you guys come up with pricing? So now that you've been through this, CO, tell us your feedback of what you had from the clients, and what are you going to take back to them now from this?
Yeah, so not just from our direct clients, but from general inquiries that we get regarding property development. The biggest problem I've seen or I come across when speaking to a lot of the inquiries that we get is that when they've first got involved with an investment property or development, they got into it without looking at the data. So even looking at comparable market analysis, comparable prices, looking at build costs and things like like that. And a lot of them have lost trust in getting involved with new property opportunity, whether it be purchasing a property investment or development, from not looking into the data. And for those who aren't able to or weren't able to find comparable sales, the looking at the cap rate is will be very helpful for those who are able to access some of the data. So I think having access or knowing, I think for some of you who have had 20 years or more experience in the area, know who to speak to, and who to contact to find that data. But for the everyday property owner who is trying to find this information, it can be a bit of work, but knowing what values to look for, like looking for sold commercial properties that have been tenanted, identifying the cap rates in the different areas will be a lot of value to our clients and give them a lot more assurance, whether they're looking at property development projects like we have, or any type of properties in general. It will help them to get a better idea of what they're looking at.
Yep. No, that's a good point. Good point. All right. Well, that's good. Well, it's been beneficial then. So is there any final words from anybody? No, that's good. Well, I've got a final word. While I'm sitting here on the show, I have this massive TV in my office playing, and of course, something came on that I thought I should photograph because, well, I wasn't on a show or anything, so it wasn't like I wasn't concentrating or anything like that at all. And let's see if I can show you where that is. And this one here, so I was thinking we'd be able to do this for our second one, our build replacement model. Ross, do you reckon we could just get a bunch of those dudes there to build our properties moving forward? We wouldn't have any contractor issues, no staff shortages. We'll just get a bunch of these robot dog things and can they lay concrete, do you reckon?
Yeah, I heard there's a 2-year lead time on the robot, Scotty.
That wouldn't surprise me because the chips are coming from China and they're locked down, so the robots are virtually dead. All right, well, there you go. That's we're up with the latest information here on Property Realm. That's it for the show today. This was all on how to price property in a complicated or rising market. I think we've done a pretty good job of covering that. If you do have any questions, hit us up on wherever you've seen this video. Even if it's not live, we monitor the feeds, so you can ask your question there. And of course, we've had the details scrolling at the bottom of the screen for the whole show. But if you want to know more about this stuff, we obviously could have let Ross off the lead and we could have gone really deep. But the problem is that Karen and Sio and Remo would have fallen asleep, and I didn't want to cover the show with just me and Ross on my own. It gets a bit, a bit freaky there. But there's a lot of technical data that we could go through on something like this. But we've tried to give you an overview and an understanding of what's there in a fairly acceptable and a way that you can take a little bit of it and use it to your advantage. So if we've done that, let us know. If you want to know more about stuff, let us know. Thanks to everyone on the Property Realm team today. That's great. And we'll see you all again, well, I don't know, sometime next week, I guess. All right. This has been Property Realm, and we talked about pricing property in a crazy market. And I have been your host, Scotty North. We'll see you next week.